Welcome to the Buying or Selling a Business Masterclass. Thank you for making the time to come out here. My name is Clyde Sheehan. I'm from the New South Wales Small Business Commission, where our role is to support small businesses throughout the state by advocating for you. We provide subsidised mediation services to help you resolve issues and conflict that you may have between yourselves and other businesses or clients. And we provide educational resources to support your business. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Darug people, who are the traditional owners of this land, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Excuse me. Before we begin, we're going to do a couple of quick housekeepings. Please hold your questions until the end. So we're going to have a panel session shortly after 1:30, where hopefully you can engage with both speakers and ask any questions that you may have. And please feel free, I know on the chairs in front of you there are books and magazines, so please feel free to take those with you as you leave. We're going to kick off today with Zoran Zarabanka, who is the founder and managing director of Exclusive Business Brokers. Exclusive Business Sales is one of Australia's largest and most established business brokerage groups. He started Exclusive in 2004 after a frustrating experience trying to sell his own business. And built it into a national operation with over 40 associates across every state, plus a recent expansion into Hawaii. Under the Exclusive umbrella, Zoran leads 4 specialist divisions: Exclusive Business Sales, Coast-to-Coast Business Sales, Max Mergers and Acquisitions for larger transactions, and an accredited business valuations practice. He is a fellow of the Australian Institute of Business Brokers, a former chair of the AIBB board, a registered business valuer, and the author of the 7-Step Guide to Selling Your Business. He also hosts a podcast, Your Next Big Move. My gosh, is there anything you don't do?
Things I heard first time, but there you go.
So I'm going to welcome Zoran to the stage, and he's going to talk you through his insights on selling and valuing a small business.
Just quickly, who's looking to buy and who owns a business at the moment? Okay, and who's looking to purchase the business potentially? All right, okay, just gives me an idea who we're talking to. I've got some notes here, so occasionally you're going to come to my papers, but I'm going to look at the crowd, so it looks like I'm spontaneous. Don't worry about it. We got about a half an hour. If you want to interrupt, feel free to interrupt and ask the questions. But we're going to have a questions and answer session, and I find that normally is much more valuable to you because it's like related to you. So either write the question on a piece of paper so you don't forget, or just interrupt and ask. And what I wanted to talk to today is a bit about the market, to give you an idea what's happening on the market, what's selling, how big small market is, how the buyers and sellers behave, and what you need to know if you're selling and buying. We're going to talk about how to value the business and pretty much how the buyers are looking at the value because they're driving the value, and we're going to touch on the process very little. So it's only 30 minutes. I'm going to try to give you a little bit about everything, just enough for you to set you for the question session later. So in terms of exits, the options that you got to exit the business, you can shut it down, and some people do shut down businesses. You can sell it to family or friends. You can sell it to shareholders and the partners in the business, so you can do the management buyout. So these are all the things that you can do without going to the market. And once when you go on the market, you got 3 options. You can sell it to individual to purchase your business. You can sell it as a business to business or strategic sale or strategic purchase. And you got the private equity groups that you can sell. Above that is the only exit that you got, or one of the options, or the last option, it's listing a business on any stock exchange, either primary or secondary stock exchange. Higher you go up this little list that I gave you, more complex the process gets. So it's very easy to sell it to the partnership buyout because partner knows everything about the business as much as you do, and it's much harder to list the business. But the value goes up as you're going up. So we don't operate in this part, and you got to have a certain size in order to list the business. what I'm going to talk about today is selling to the individual, selling or buying for the mergers, or dealing with private equity groups. So just a couple of statistics. This looks much better on the screen, but I'll try to run you through it. There's about 2.1 million businesses, registered businesses, according to Australian Bureau of the Statistics out there. Approximately 60% of them turn less than $50,000 a year. So what I think it's happening, that they actually are looking at the ABN numbers and from there that they're calculating how many businesses are there. Now, when you go through this, approximately, actually, I'll give you exact number, 8.5% turn over more than $2 million, and 1.9% of the businesses turn over more than $10 million. So you got some of the listed companies, you exclude them. 2% of the business in Australia is businesses that turn over $10 million. So 2% may gonna sound little, but actually it's not. Think about it. If you got 100 people in the room, or 50 people in the room, 50 business owners in the room, chances are one of them's got a business more than $10 million in turnover. So it's not that bad, all right? But what it tells us that the smaller businesses is the largest part of the market. Then the medium-sized businesses kind of gets a little bit smaller, and those top businesses are really on top. And average time for business owner to sell a business is 14.5 years. Business owners that run larger businesses tend to hold them for the long time. So the market is, there's a lot of smaller end businesses on the market. Most of the businesses, when I'm touching on this, most of the businesses that exit, and we don't know, like I read about 50, 60%, but I think it's all guesswork. The exit is not planned. So something happens either in your life or in your business, and you decide to exit. So what happened during the the COVID? During the COVID, we had a drop of selling during the COVID time, but we had a high demand from the buyers during the COVID time. And when people come to us, sellers come to us and say, it's a good time to sell. And I said, yes, it is. And they said, of course you're going to say that. So no one believed us. But it was a really good time, because this is first and probably only time that I experienced this, that people were looking to buy the business, to get into small business for the security, because they were afraid of what's going to happen with their job. But what happened after the COVID, we had this pent-up demand, and all of a sudden it was a spike. And a lot of those people did not plan to exit, but what they were doing is, because it was still uncertain, and they were thinking, this is a good time, this was too tough for me, I've been running this business for 20 years, better get out now. So it was kind of just happened to them, so it wasn't planned. So most of the exits are not planned. And even if you do some planning, just being here, it will help you actually have that process better, and hopefully get better back on the end. So market looks like this. You got the buyers on the other side, on one side, and you got the sellers on the other side. And what puts them together, it's a desire to actually transact. So you can't transact a deal without a willing buyer and willing seller. So what's happening? Seller wants to sell, buyer wants to buy. So you would think it's a very easy process. You meet them together, they agree on the price, and they do the deal. But it's actually a little bit more complex than that when you bring a risk into equation. So what is happening is that while they want to transact, and that's a common goal, the reason for transaction is different. So the seller wants to exit and gets as much money on the time of the settlement, while the buyer is looking for future maintainable profits. And that's when we introduce that concept of risk into it. So whole conversation in selling, and you'll see that later when I start talking about negotiation, whole conversation in selling, it's not about how much money I'm gonna earn or how much money I'm gonna get for my business, but it's more what's the likelihood of this not working out for me on both sides. So why that happens? Well, there's something called, well, there's a few names for this, but just think about this. If you were to take if I go and purchase a car from the dealer today, and I drive it on the street tomorrow, we all know that that car instantly depreciates. So it's anywhere between 10 to 20%. So I bought a car for $50,000. If I want to sell that car next day, I will never get $50,000. Anybody knows why that happens? Any ideas? Any guesses? Okay, so it is well, I would argue it's a still new car. I didn't drive it, I just took it home, but it is now perceived as a second-hand. Why is that important? What kind of risk? We're getting in the right direction. Correct, 100%, and that's where exactly the issue, right? So it's got nothing to do with the car being 1 day old. What it's got to do with you don't trust the source. Well, second-hand car dealers or dealers, you can't trust them, but like you would argue, you can trust, you know, anybody who's trying to sell you anything. But I can trust if I'm selling a car and I'm not a dealer, you're going to trust me less than what you're going to trust the dealer, because I know everything about the car, and you coming from the outside and you got no idea what's happening with the car is a problem with the car that I don't want to disclose. Similar thing happens with the business, is just multiplied by about 10 times, all right? Because the car is simple, relatively, it's a complex mechanics, but everything, it's all tangible. Business is totally intangible, and the seller has got inherent reason to actually tell you that everything is good or not tell you the problems. And whole thing about selling his businesses is to actually disclose that to the buyer, and then if the buyer is confident enough that all the facts are presented to them and they can actually understand it, they'll buy that business, because remember, they looking for future maintainable profits. So if I got enough information about your business, then I can make my own decision and say, well, okay, this makes sense, I'll buy this business. They're still taking a risk, all right, but the risk is minimized. And that's the huge reason why a lot of businesses don't sell, because people actually don't want to disclose everything that's needed to be disclosed. And just on that subject, we can talk for 2 hours, but we gotta move on. So I've got some statistics here for you, and I'm just gonna go very quickly through them. 50% of the buyers takes them about a year to buy the business. The other 50 takes more than 1 year to buy the business. So it's a long process. So buyers in the room, don't expect that you're going to go and find a business tomorrow. You're going to look at first business, second business, and you're learning through the process. So another interesting thing that from our point of view, we actually know which buyer looked at how many businesses, and approximately 40% of the buyers look at 10 or more businesses from us before they purchase the business. Some look at 20 to 30 or 50 or 60, and it just like, so it's really easy to dismiss them. Oh, these guys are not serious. No, those guys are really, really serious. They just got a little bit lower threshold for risk, and they want to make their decision properly. So if you're a buyer out there, don't be afraid to look at the businesses, because each time you look at the business, you negotiate the business, you're going to learn a little bit more about this, about the process. For the seller out there, don't get disappointed, or if they tell you they've been on the market for 3 years, don't think they're not a buyer. Looking at purchasing a business is not an easy task to do. So longer the people stay on the market, more committed they get to purchasing the business. Another thing that happens in the process of looking for the business to purchase, you're going to miss on 1 or 2 good ones, but you need a hindsight to realize that. And that's the knowledge that you need. The ones that you miss out there, that's how you're going to learn what you're actually looking for. On average, takes 201 days to take a business from the offer, from going to the market to money in the bank. So 201, that's about 8 point something month. This is interesting one. So we've done a really large survey of the people that they were on the market with us and why they didn't buy. And 40% of the reason is that they found the business, but business was overpriced. The other 40% of the reason, or people that told us the reason for not buying, was the fact that they found the business, but there was not enough transparency and they couldn't make a purchasing decision. They liked the business, they thought the price was right, but they couldn't get enough information to say, hey, this profit's going to be sustained as I take it over. So they decided to walk away from the deal. So for advice for the sellers, be open and transparent. $10,000 problem at the beginning of the deal is a deal killer on the end. So if I don't disclose you something at the beginning and then you find that out yourself, you think everything else the seller told you is not true and accurate. From the buyer's point of view, be patient with the seller and understand their emotion, because they're also afraid, and I think I'm founded, but I can understand why they think so, that if I give you all the information, you're going to misuse that information. I can't give you my clients, I can't give you anything. I really have to be confidential. It's good to be confidential. Having said that, I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't know how many deals we've done. We had maybe in 5 instances that serious breach, somebody said something to someone that they shouldn't, but even in those 5 instances that happened, there was no damage caused. It was just a bit of uncomfortable conversation that we had to have with somebody. So it's not hard to take a business to the market without anybody knowing, but also it's not like every buyer wants to get your information and just misuse it. It doesn't happen. It happens very rarely. And just another statistic on marketing. There's 3 ways to find a buyer when you're selling a business. You can either go directly to the competitors and approach the industry, doesn't have to be competitor. You can market the business through certain platforms, websites, and other ways of marketing. And the last one is, in our case, we go to large database. And that's it. There's nothing else you can do to actually market the business. Short of, you being in the bus or plane and somebody next to you starts talking to you and it just happened and they buy the business. But actively, these are the 3 things that you can do. So why is that important? Because it's not that hard. Most of the people we're talking to, they said, okay, where are you going to bring the buyers? Don't worry about the buyers. We're going to find the buyers. That's very easy part. It's actually getting that deal across the line, preparing to do what you need to do, and then doing it once we have a buyer. That's very important. And normally, within 90 days, we have a buyer. But all the other time is spent getting this across the line. So finding, like, if we were to make a list of the clients and in, let's say, industry buyout, in 1 week, I contacted every single one of them, because we can do about, 50 to 100 phone calls a day with emails and everything. I'm going to get through to most of them in 1 week. And that's it, it's done. So it's really important to price that business right. Remember, 40% of reasons why you're not going to sell the business is if you're trying to sell it for more than market value. And the other 40% is that transparency. So be transparent, get everything in order, because you should have a buyer in 3 months. It's not a years or anything like that. In 3 months, we should have a buyer. So I'm going to get into, so far so good. Any questions? No one asleep? Good. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about the market. So, about the valuations. And what drives the value of the business? 3 points. One is the market, how active or passive market is. So for example, if you go to retail, it's a little bit harder to sell it now versus accounting practice that everybody wants. So that drives the price. The other 2 components, so market you can't control. Market is a market. But the other 2 components we can control to some degree, all right? So one is the risk associated with the business, and the other one is profit, all right? So how much money that business produces for the owner-operator, or for the owner of the business, doesn't have to be operator, and how secure that business after the takeover of the new owner, how secure is that profit after the purchaser buys the business. So it's not so much how much money I'm making today, It's what's going to happen with the business after the buyer buys it. And you don't have any control of that, and no one, but that's how the buyers are actually making a decision, all right? So this morning I had a conversation with one of my guys, and he said, look, we got a very, very profitable business. So we're talking about $1 million to bottom line over the last 2 or 3 years. It's a manufacturing, but it's more trade rather than manufacturing. They do certain type of fencing, very specialized fencing, and which needs to be made. So we're calling it manufacturing, but it's kind of, you know, in between trade and manufacturing. So the client will come to the business, and the business will then go out there, do the measurements for these big farms and everything else, go in, manufacture everything, and then deliver. And here's the problem that we encounter with this. All the quoting is done by one person, which is the owner of the business. All right, all the quoting, and it's actually quite complex. And once when that quoting is done, he's the one that actually organizes manufacturing, and then people manufacture and install. And there's a risk in there, because when and look, you know, it's quite serious size business. When we were talking to the owner, we say, how do you quote this? He goes, well, easy. I just look at it, I'll tell you what it is. I've been doing this for 25 years. Well, that's easy for you, but somebody coming into the business, that's very hard. Another thing is, well, what do you do once when you, how do you manage the process? Well, I got everything in my head, all right? So we actually we didn't, but I think we're going to take a business of the market. We're going to sort it out. We're going to put some processes for quoting and everything else in place before we actually go back on the market, because we're asking $3.5 million for this business, and it's a lot of risk and serious money exchanging hands. Business as investment sits somewhere between, well, the most secure investment is a government bonds, all right? Highly unlikely that Australia is going to go bust. If we need some more money, we're just going to put the GST up and we're going to get more money, all right? So you're looking about 5% return. And then without going through everything, you got commercial properties, you got on that side, we have listed companies and so on. On the other side, we got speculative assets like Bitcoin and that type of stuff. So businesses sit somewhere in between these solid traditional investments and these speculative assets. And most of the deals that are done out there, depending on the size, and I'm going to touch on this in a second, I know you want to know this, happen somewhere between 1 and 5 times. All right? So I just got some notes here so I don't get it wrong. I'm going to look at it. So if you're getting a 10 to 17% return from the share market, that equates to 6 to 10 times profit. So that's why it's very hard to get anything over 5 times for any size of the business, because it reflects 20% return. Make sense? Now, 5 times, the question is 5 or 1 or 3 times or what? And everybody heard these multipliers. It's 5 times of profit. Well, what type of profit are we talking about? Is this profit over 3 years? Or is it last year profit? Or is it profit including your wages? Or is it adjusted profit or non-adjusted profit? And that's where a lot of people get it wrong, because you hear some information and then you go, well, I took myself, plus I've got some perks like a car and whatnot, and I'm making $500,000. Oh, this is $2.5 million business because you took a wage. Probably it's not, all right? Another big error that people make when they're selling a business is they got a very heavy capitalized businesses. So it's not this as a goodwill plus assets. All right, so it's all inclusive, because as a buyer, let's say if I'm buying a business, I'm looking return on my investment. It's not only what I can do with that money, what business I can buy, but what else I can do with this money. So if I have to give you for $500,000 profit business, if I have to give you $2.5 million for it, and then go and buy your assets for another $1 million, I'm now 3.5. My return on investment is down to 7-8%. I'm way better putting this money in the share market and just enjoying myself. It's also very liquid. It's not easy to exit from the business, but it's very easy to exit from the share market. Press one button and it's sold. So just imagine this, like if you got a triangle or pyramid or whatever it is, all right, something going up and it's getting smaller on the end. So on the bottom, remember when I gave you statistics at the beginning, the largest segment of the market is small businesses, which is owner-operator businesses where somebody buys themselves a job. So at today's market, we're talking anywhere between up to $200,000 that the owner-operator takes, 150, some to 200 that the owner-operator takes, including their wage and everything else. And those businesses are valued differently or priced differently from buyer's point of view. How do they price? They will look at the owner's operator's earnings, and they're going to multiply that whole inclusive, everything that you take out of the business. You're running a little coffee shop and you're making $150,000 for yourself on the end of the year. You're going to get that between 1 and 1.5 times. All right? You may going to go a little bit under, a little bit over, but that's your. So you're not going to get 3 times on that. Never. All right? Next level of that is something that creates profit after the owner wage. So, and that owner wage is really interesting. Like when the buyers, the sellers are always arguing that their wage should be lower, and the buyers arguing it should be higher because it leaves a lot of profit. But for years in this industry, people would take a owner's wage for $100,000 and say this is fair market wage for the owner. It's not anymore. Like you can't argue that for running a business you should get only 100,000. Like it's much harder than that. So you're probably looking anywhere between 150 and 200,000. All right. So when you take that wage away, whatever's left as a profit, that gets up to 3 times. Plus it could be some inventory if it's small inventory, but if you got a large inventory, it's not going to happen. So I'll give you an example. If you got a business that makes, and this is really hard to do this without the slide so you can load the numbers, but I hope you can follow with me because it is important. If you got a business that makes $1 million and it hasn't got any inventory and you pay $3 million, and then you got another business that makes $1 million, but it does have a $3 million with the inventory. Anything in building that's selling any building products, you need an inventory. One, I'm actually paying $6 million, the other one, I'm paying $3 million. So your inventory will have to be absorbed at this price. You may gonna get a little bit more than 3 times, but you're not gonna get plus inventory. And that's why it's a really good idea to get a valuation before you take a business to the market. Or when you start thinking about selling a business, and don't go to your accountant because it's biased, all right? I'll tell you why not to go to your accountant for the valuation. Because they wanna protect you, and they initial desire is to price it higher, because if you got a $3 million business and I tell you it's worth 5, no harm done. But actually, remember I said it takes 90 days to find a buyer. There's a lot of harm if you're trying to, because if you offer me a business for 5 million and I say no, and then 6 months later I come back to you and I said, okay, I'll take your offer. First thing you're thinking, what's wrong with it? And if I'm offering it for 3, you're going to drop down the price. So you have to price it right, all right? So I got 5 minutes, so I got to rush through this. So, and I can talk about these valuations forever and a day, but we got to move on. So it brings me to this, what happens if you overprice the business? Well, everybody in this room either rented or purchased the house or commercial property or bought some significant asset. So what happens when you go on the market, and we talked about the buyers earlier, you're gonna your first part of spending time on the market, your initial time, it's actually market research to figure out where the prices are and everything else. During that process, you're gonna miss 1 or 2 good deals. Now you know what the prices are, and you know what a good deal is. So next time when you find a good deal, you're gonna be the first one. So if it's so good. Like that's why the real estate agents always stay in touch with you for a year when you start experimenting and looking at the open houses, because they know once when you find a house, you're going to be the first guy there to say, here's my offer and I'm going to pay asking price. That only happens if asking price makes sense. If I got a business on the market for $2 million and you want this business, you won't even offer $1 million if it's worth half. And that's common to happen. So why? Because you don't want to insult me, all right? And you don't want to, like, it's really hard to say somebody who's asking $2 million, hey, it's only worth $1 million. You know, whose ugly baby is this? You don't do that. So it's really, really important to price it right and take it to the market. Otherwise, you're going to get stale effect. A lot of these businesses that start too high end up selling below market value. So don't be that guy. From the buyer's point of view, if your budget is $500,000, look at the businesses from $1 million below. Really good advice. And then if you find something that's out of the budget, you think it's a good business, give them the offer. And they'll tell you where to go, and just wait, stay in touch with them. Eventually they will soften up. So, and that's a common kind of error when people go on the market, that they're looking at the businesses exactly to what their budget is, double that, because most of the businesses are overpriced out there. Not the ones we sell, but most of the others. Now, there's currently probably 30,000 businesses on the market, all right, today. There's about, it dropped down from the COVID, actively advertised is about 18,000, plus all the others, they are actually exchange hands or direct approaches or whatever it is. So you're looking at about 30,000. There's plenty out there, but it's messy. And just because we're running out of time, just want to, I did promise that we're going to talk about the negotiations. So what happens is, often when we meet people, they'll say, listen, I already had 3 offers for the business. The offer, the negotiation starts after the price is agreed. And I'm sure Joanna's going to talk a lot about this. Price is always the first thing that's agreed. And I'm just going to run through a couple of things that you need to think about if you're buying or selling, that you will have to agree on. Obviously, price. How are you going to pay? Or what's the schedule of payment? When do you pay it? Appropriation, this is just the technical part. Goodwill, stocks, how the stock's going to be valued. So this inventory, often you're going to find out that buyers won't pay something, full price for something that didn't sell for 12 months or 2 years. So maybe sitting on your books like a $3 million or $1 million or $500,000 worth of inventory, but realistically, you'll have to discount a good portion of it. Type of the purchase is sell shares or assets, supply agreement, equipment rental, property leases. They need to be agreed. Employment entitlement. So that's another thing. An accountant can help you with this. It's not what you sell a business for, but what you walk away with. So it's how you structure for the sale, and can you actually save on taxes? And there's a lot of small business discounts that you can take advantage out of. And but also, what else you have to pay. So normally, any liabilities incurred before the settlement, you'll have to pay. And then we get into negotiation around employment entitlements. Long service leave, leave in general, that's easy. But what happens now, more and more industries, sick leave occurs in perpetuity. So it's not uncommon that we get to the settlement stage and then we got $300,000 or $500,000 in sick leave entitlements. So one party thinks, well, this is not entitlement, this is contingency. The other one say, well, I don't know, what if they all get sick? I mean, I'll have to, and they probably won't all get sick. And if they all get sick next day, you've got a much bigger problem than paying $300,000. But these are things that we need to negotiate through a process. Restraint of trade, that's another one. How long and how far you're not going to be able to do this. So I'm going to give you a little trick that we use very often, all right? You can use it as well, Joanna. Rather than entering to, so one way when you got a deferred payment to secure them, Obviously, purchaser has to put some sort of security against that deferred payment. If for whatever reason doesn't come through, I'm allowed to, I've got some recourse. One way to do this is actually to say, I'll enter into restraint of trade for whatever period of time. And if there's a deferred payment, we say, okay, if that deferred payment misses the due date, the restraint of trade is null and void. So I can actually start approaching your customers. And it gives you really, really good security, depending on the business that you're selling. But if you've got 5, 6 large customers, I'll make that payment because I don't want you going to competitor and selling that to them because... So this is all part of negotiation. What else we got? Clients' payments, work in progress, that's a big one. Oh, how the work in progress gets calculated. Warranties and guarantees. What about work warranties? We're looking at the business now, and I know it's going to be a problem, so we got to come up with the idea how we're going to handle it. They provide 10-year warranty for work done. So if you buy the business now, even if you didn't buy a company, you don't want to have somebody saying, hey, I've got a claim on this, and you say, well, it's not my problem. The old owner's going to do it. The old owner doesn't do it, but it's your bad goodwill, right? So you have to really honor this, and you've got no idea how much of that is. But you can actually do. You can calculate this and prepare this in advance. And the list goes on. It is about 30 points that we normally negotiate, and there's always 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 points on top of this. So you really got to prepare for it. Do I have another 2 minutes? 2 minutes, that's all? 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Just one thing, that handover, how long does it take? And that's a common question that people ask us. All right, if I sell the business or if I buy the business, how long can I actually ask somebody to stay with me? Or if I sell the business, how long am I going to have to stay to actually pass on? And the answer is it depends. Depends on the size and the complexity of the business and who the buyer is. If you're selling in the industry, it's going to be much faster. If I'm accountant to accountant, quick deal, all right? But if I'm an accountant and I'm buying manufacturing business, I'll need you for longer time. Larger the business, longer you have to stay. But in general, the handover is designed in 4 parts. First one is when you buy the business, you just look but don't touch and get to really understand it. Remember, you already done the due diligence, go through negotiation, you know this business very well. Second part of this is outgoing owner keeps on running a business and starts to train incoming owner. Then the incoming owner starts running a business and the outgoing owner just stays there as some sort of supervisor. On the end of these 3 parts, if you are selling or even if you're buying, it's a really good idea to do. Ask the owner or offer to the buyer that you're going to stay on some sort of consultancy. And just if you need me, I'm here to actually help as assist. And make sure that you negotiate this fair. So let's say $3,000, $2,000 a day. So you don't want him to call you on the daily basis and say, I can't find the stapler. I'll tell you where the stapler is for $3,000, no problem. But you have to give them opportunity that if they really need you and they got to issue $3,000 is not a problem, but make yourself available. So you do it on those 3 stages. You design that before you go on the market, and then you offer this to the buyer. So it's pretty simple, and that's why it will depend on complexity of the business. We had people stay, almost permanent, like we got something now, and they're prepared because it's a lot of R&D and whatnot, and they're happy to stay for years. But we had the deals they're done, and they just stay for a few weeks. Now, anything longer than several weeks, you have to have some payment for it because you can't stay for a year. You got to go and earn money, all right? And that's normally negotiated as well. And I think I always stayed my time, did I? Yeah, okay. So we're not going to do the questions. We're going to do that later. All right, back to whoever wants this microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Zoran. We were going to have a break, but I think because of time, we're just going to keep going. And if anyone would like to just pop out for tea and coffee, please do feel free. We're going to move on to Joanna Oakey, who is the Managing Director at Aspect Legal. Managing Partner of Aspect Legal, a commercial legal firm recognised for the last 3 years in a row as the top boutique lawyers in Australasia in the area of SME business sales. She is an award-winning commercial lawyer with over 25 years' experience working with thousands of businesses, from small startups through to a large national and multinational brand, as they buy, grow, and exit. Joanna is also the host of 2 top-rating podcasts, the Deal Room Podcast and Talking Law, and the author of an award-winning best-selling book, Buy, Grow, Exit, which you will all be receiving a copy of today. Thank you, Joanna.
Hi all. Okay, it's hard to talk after Zoran. He is so entertaining and interesting. And I usually have slides. And so the tricky thing for a lawyer is how to make this sort of stuff interesting when I can't even show you pictures. So I'll talk about a few things, and then obviously we have Q&A with both Zoran and I coming next. But I would actually like to guide a lot of my sort of discussion here based on what you want to hear. Because, quite often I talk to audiences who are in lots of different phases and different areas of what they're interested in at the moment. I want to make sure I'm meeting you where you are right now. So just in case I can't answer you where you are right now, I'm just going to tell you about a few resources right now. First one is Buy, Grow, Exit. You've got a copy here, and if you're in the back rows, I get it, you came in and you didn't want to come all the way to the front, but the book is at the front. So before you go, make sure you grab yourself one of the books. They're in the first few rows. If you are interested in finding out more about the legal side, but also the generally commercial side of buying or selling a business, I also have the Deal Room podcast, which is available on Apple Podcast or Spotify or where you listen to your favourite podcast right now. We have more than 300 episodes. Actually, I started that podcast before it was even a thing, really. Mostly I've been going for 8 years now, so there you go. But there's more than 300 episodes where we talk about almost anything you might wonder about in relation to buying or selling a business. So go check that out, free resources. So we've got the book. We've got some free resources available for you as well. If you've got one of the flyers there, if you just scan the QR code, you can get a whole heap of resources where I talk about the timeline of the deal, because I can't show you that today. And we've got a whole heap of free webinars. So there you go. If there's something you really want to know about but I haven't talked about it today, it'll either be in the book or any of those free resources that I'm talking about. So obviously we're talking about business sale and purchase today. Looks like we've got about an even split in the room between buyers and sellers, which is fantastic. Very exciting. This is such an exciting area. I started my legal career more than 25, maybe close to 30 years ago in a different area of law, which was really boring. And a few years in, I got a taste of working on a business sale. And I'm probably a bit of a business person at heart. And I think the thing is, when I got into a business sale, I thought, this is it. This is the best possible area of law you could be in. Because for sellers, it's such a critical point. You know, you've had all of these years of building a business, and that point of sale is where you turn that into cash, right? It's a really exciting but very important point. For buyers, many buyers who are buying a business for the first time are embarking on this whole new area, an exciting phase for themselves personally, but for themselves from a business perspective. So it's exciting being on buy side or sell side, and that's why I ended up turning a career into this area, because I absolutely love it. It's so exciting working with sellers to achieve their dreams. It's so exciting working with buyers to achieve their dreams as well. But it's not a road that is simple always. Zoran talked about the time frame. And I promise you, a sale process, no matter what you know, takes longer than you ever expected it would, and more energy, right? And so the winners are the people who can stay in there in the process, stay engaged, and not get overwhelmed, because it can be a very overwhelming process. How many of you have sort of already been in a process, a sale process? You're a buyer, you've started in the buying process, you're a seller, you've started to get yourself prepared, or you've started to talk to potential buyers? How many of you are sort of feel like you've been, okay, yeah, so only a few. And would you agree it can be an overwhelming space once you get started? Is that the truth? I think the thing is there is so much that there's so much benefit of being educated and prepared right from the beginning. But then the question is, how do I do that? What is it that I need to know right from the beginning? So what are buyers after? Buyers are after the value that sits in the business, fully extrapolating to them when they're in charge of the business, and then being able to realise that full value from what they've seen in the information memorandum, in all the stuff they've seen when they've talked to the business brokers. What are sellers after? Sellers are after usually the maximum price in their pocket at the end of the day. That's a thing many sellers forget. It's about in their pocket at the end of the day. But the one thing that buyers and sellers don't think about, I think, until they've become a little bit more educated in the process, is how it is that you structure a deal to get all of those sorts of things. Because there's so many different ways that you can approach structuring a deal. So we've got share sale versus business sale. Can I have hands up? Anyone who, hand on their heart, could say they completely understand the difference between share sale and a business sale and all of the different factors. I love it. You're right, okay, 2. Anyone else? And so that means the rest of the room, 3, okay, all right, very impressive. For the rest of the room, actually in this book that you have on page around about 242, I've got a picture for you, but the big thing is share sale versus business sale is just one of the ways that you can have a different approach to structuring a deal. From sell side, there can be a massive tax difference in whether you're in a share sale versus a business sale. I talk about a story in the book, and actually I have a podcast about this one, I think, too, where the seller was looking at more than, I think in that particular instance, $2 million in tax difference between a share sale and a business sale. So tax is a massive thing for sellers to think about. But then on the flip side, a share sale can hold a lot more risk for sellers in the warranties that they'll need to commit to post-sale. So there's a bit of things we need to weigh here. We've got return in your pocket, tax, but then we might have risk that we're holding. From a buy-side perspective, share sales can be a bit of a double-edged sword. The positives in a share sale, anyone think about why a buyer might like a share sale? The general difference being that in a business sale, essentially what you're doing is you're extracting all of the assets and you're taking them and moving them over into another entity. And so we've got less risk of the liabilities that is sitting in that original entity, but we have, what does that mean? If we're extracting all of the assets and we're moving them over, we essentially are disturbing many contracts and relationships that are in the business. So from a buy-side perspective, some of the benefits of a share sale are that it can be a safer way to transact the deal in order to retain the value that sits in that business, because customers often may not even know. Employee contracts stay the same, suppliers may not know. So depending on the kind of business, that might be a real benefit for a buyer. But the flip side for a buyer is you're taking on potentially the skeletons of the history of that company. So there's a lot to think about when you think about how you're going to transact a sale, both from sell side and buy side. We've talked about share sale and business sale. Other things to think about, part sale versus full sale. Many buyers will like the idea that a seller stays somewhat involved in the business for a period of time in order for them to ensure that that key knowledge has transferred over. And they might do that by wanting the seller to stay in the business. Sometimes it's through earn-outs. Has everyone heard the concept of earn-outs? Sometimes it's through the seller retaining ownership in the business, and then building structures for the future for that ultimate exit to happen through future-based options or other ways of dealing with that transfer of shares into the future. Sometimes our sellers will come to me and say, I want to keep 10%, 20% in the business because I've met this buyer. I think they're going to set it on fire and I want to be part of that. So when we look at structure of a deal, we're not just looking at is it share sale or business sale. We're also looking at is it part sale, is it full sale? If it's part sale, then how are we moving the rest of those shares over time? We might also be looking at when payment is made. Is the buyer paying fully at completion being settlement, or is part of the payment deferred to the future? So obviously, sellers generally want as much of the money up front as they can possibly get, and buyers like the concept of deferred payments, not just because of a cash flow perspective, but also because of a risk-sharing opportunity in deferred payments. But it depends in the part of the market that you sit, what those deferred payments look like. So if you're sitting in the sub $2 million sale component of the market, usually deferred payments won't be what we call at risk. They're more likely to be a vendor finance kind of arrangement where there's a cash flow perspective. When we're talking about larger businesses, we have much more of a likelihood that we'll have what we call at-risk deferred payments, which is usually by way of an earn-out. So in the book, I talk a lot about what an earn-out is and what the factors are that you need to come to from a sell-side perspective and a buy-side perspective. Because deferred payments and sometimes even at-risk deferred payments like earn-outs can be good for sellers sometimes. Why might they be good for sellers? Sorry? Exactly, because you can potentially extract more value. Because the reason for an earn-out is a risk-sharing mechanism where a buyer says, well, hold on, I'm not sure if what you have said about the business is true, and I'm not sure if when there's a change of ownership that the business will continue to operate in the way that it was. As a buyer, you want to ensure that you've got that knowledge, the knowledge and the relationships that drove the business performance pre-completion. And earn-outs are a fantastic mechanism, potentially, of sharing that risk. So the benefit for a seller in an earn-out situation is they potentially have the opportunity for a larger buyer pool and a higher price. But that comes then with its own risks. So if we're acting sell side, we say, okay, well, what are the mechanisms at our disposal to protect against the risk that might create? And we say, okay, well, the way we set this out in a contract and the security that we set up for these payments in the future, but also the commercials. How are you going to ensure that the buyer doesn't do things in the business that deplete the value of the business post-completion? Because that's always and should always be a concern of the seller. If you are exposed to a post-completion payment based on the performance of the business, how do you ensure that you can drive or be part of the performance of that business post-completion? Okay, so there's actually lots of other things to think about in the structure of a deal, but I just thought that high-level overview might be useful for you all to hear, because quite often I hear sellers come in and they'll say, I only want the deal that is full payment at completion. And I say, fantastic, great if you can get that is also the price that you want. But we have to be realistic often with what the buyer pool is in the market at the time, and you might have to be more flexible. And indeed, there might be a benefit from an economic perspective for you being more flexible as well. But from a buy side, what's the interesting thing to take out of all of this? Sometimes you can come in with an offer that's a lot lower than other offers on the table, but that is the terms that a seller wants more. And I have seen this in many instances where a seller will say, I have absolute faith in my business, but I'm cooked. I'm done. I want my money. I want out. I don't care if there's a few $1 million worth of difference. I'll take the lower offer to get the money right now rather than take the risk. But I think what you need to do is you need to understand how to weigh up those options. And then you need to understand with the option that you've taken to ensure that you can secure that option as much as possible. It's interesting, actually, I've got quite a few podcasts about earnouts, and one of the guests once said to me that in her business circles, there was this talk about the fact that no earnouts are never paid. And it's interesting, that is not my experience. My experience is in most of the transactions we deal with, if they have been set up right, earnouts do trigger and are paid, but they have to be set up right. Okay, so I might just talk very quickly about some key legal documents just to get you across the sorts of documents that are in a transaction. So we'll start with a non-disclosure agreement if you're sell side. The basic rule is do not hand over any confidential information until you have a non-disclosure agreement with the person who is receiving that information or that you're sending that information to. Then once you have agreed the commercial terms, we'll have what's called a term sheet or a heads of agreement or a memorandum of understanding or a letter of intent or an MBIO. I love how there are so many names for basically the same document. But it's essentially a document that just contains the high-level commercial terms that you've agreed. Then you've got the sale contract. So the sale contract will either be a share sale agreement if you're in a share sale, or a business sale agreement if you're in a business sale, or an asset sale agreement if you're just cherry picking, if there's assets that are just being cherry picked. And that is the document that contains the elements, the major elements of risk sharing between the buyer and the seller through the mechanism of warranties and indemnities. Then we'll have contracting agreements, employment agreements, leases, assignments of leases, maybe, shareholders agreements, and security documents. So I don't want to talk about boring things. I'm trying to work out which of these are most useful for you. Maybe what I might talk about is some common pitfalls that I see where buyers and sellers often go wrong. I've got heaps of examples in the book. They're all true examples, so they're cases that I've picked from so many deals that have so many interesting things that happen on buy side and sell side. But the very first thing I would say is education is the key. So I love that you're all here. This is an important component. And the second thing I would say is having the right deal team on your side, but an imperative step is you understanding, at least from a high level, what's happening in the process. Because what can happen is when you don't understand, when buyers and sellers don't understand exactly what's happening in the process, there is a whole heap of emotion and fear that comes out. And what happens when we've got fear is sometimes we then end up in situations where either the buyer or seller or both of them become very obstinate about a position that maybe there's actually a very easy commercial or legal solution to. And that's what we see a lot of the time if we have buyers and sellers who haven't spent enough time getting their head around the process. Does that make sense? Okay, so general pitfalls for a buyer. Generally speaking, obviously the pitfalls around the value that they think they're buying is not there, either because A, it wasn't in the business to begin with, or more likely, B, the value in the business is too interconnected with the seller, and there's a difficult process in decoupling the business value from the founder, which is a key issue in business sale. I guess the other risk for buyers are risks appear after the sale that drag down the value of what they've purchased. And of course, this is the role of due diligence. And due diligence is an incredibly important part of the acquisition process, and really important from both sides. Sell side, as Zoran said, in fact, Zoran started off his talk talking about the issue with sellers who weren't ready for due diligence, who weren't ready to hand over information. And actually, I had an interesting conversation just earlier today with someone who was looking to buy a business and had reflected that was an issue as they were reviewing businesses to buy. And I talk to buyers all the time who will say, if they don't get the information that they need in that due diligence process, and it takes too long to come, and it's messy and disorganised when it comes through, and only part answers the questions they have, red flags are up everywhere. And that will, even if they continue with the transaction, it will impact price, and it will impact the terms that I talked about before in the structure of the deal. They'll want to bake in ways that they can protect themselves more through payment protections, through earn-outs, if they even continue. So due diligence, super important, both sell side and buy side. So for a seller, what are the common pitfalls? That there's too much risk in after the sale that they continue to hold. And once again, we control this through the sale contract. And also that they don't get fully paid. And actually that's a fear. You know, as I said before, with sellers, deferred payments, there's a lot of benefits in opening yourself up to post-completion payments, but there's a lot of fear because you have to make sure you actually get paid at the end of the day and you're not chasing it. So how do you address these risks in a transaction? Buyers through due diligence, as I said before. Due diligence being proper investigation into the correct areas of the business. One other mistake that I see buyers sometimes make is going really broad in the information that they're asking for, getting a whole heap of information but losing the wood for the trees. Does that make sense? So you're going to know what you're looking for in there. Number 2, deal structure. I've talked about deal structure before. Yep, okay, 5 minutes. Number 3, the sale contract. So how the sale contract is set up to protect you as a buyer from risk. And number 4, operational approaches, because there's a heap that you can do from a commercial approach that will also help make sure you lock in that value. So sellers, how do sellers address the risks that I've talked about? Prepare for sale. You should really be, Zoran quoted a statistic, I think he said something like 50 to 60% of exits happen when the seller's not ready for it. Was that your statistic? Involuntary, yeah. And certainly we definitely see when we have sellers who have been perhaps tapped on the shoulder by a potential buyer, so they haven't even thought about sale, versus sellers on the complete other end of the spectrum who have spent time and attention in preparing their business for sale. There's a huge difference in the outcomes. And I tell you, it's an interesting thing because usually the concept is if I've been tapped on the shoulder by a buyer and I wasn't ready for sale, that should be an excellent transaction. But what actually happens is it's a massive risk for sellers, I think, but it's a risk for buyers as well in this situation. When you're dealing with someone who's a seller who's never been through the process, they get right to the end and then suddenly they think, actually, could I have gotten more from this if I had have shopped the business around a bit, is what actually happens quite a bit. So anyway, that's an interesting thing. So I guess for sellers, ensure that the sale contract doesn't work unfairly against you and make sure you've got security, proper security for deferred payments. So my last tips, I would just say for sellers and buyers, get educated. There's a whole heap of free resources. There's no reasons not to be educated in the high-level things to think about. engage an experienced deal team. So walk the road with people who have walked this road many times before. I think that's one of the key things, both from an accounting and a legal perspective. Many sellers, and actually buyers as well, don't understand that there is a difference between a general practice accountant and a general practice lawyer who don't deal in these areas day after day. You need both of those professionals by your side who walk this road every single day and who understand the decisions that you need to make buy or sell side. For sellers, and deal team, actually we've got a checklist if you're interested in helping you choose your deal team, the questions that you can ask to understand if the people that you're looking at engaging are experienced. Work out if they actually, because it's easy for someone to say, yeah, I do this all the time, but the real trick is knowing how to ask them so that you can evaluate whether that's true or not. So if you're interested, we've got some checklists on that we can sell you. Just shoot me an email. Actually, I don't know if you've got my details anyway. My business cards are at the back. Just shoot me an email if you want that, and I'll send it to you. So sellers and buyers, I would say, think like the other side. So for sellers, think like your buyer. Understand what your buyer will feel exposed by and what they are trying to protect without feeling affronted by some of the questions and suggestions that are made. And sell side, take the same approach. So, buyer side, take the same approach. Think like your buyer, your seller. When you're a buyer, remember that this person or group of people likely have grown this business for a long period of time and can be very sensitive to some of the questions that you might be asking along the way. So look at it from their perspective, and a lot of the issues that come up in the sale process can be resolved quite easily. And then for sell side, get ready for due diligence, be ready to provide information and documentation quickly, and get ready to have all of the elements for your contract ready to go. Employee entitlements, I love that Zoran called that out. That's like one of the things that sellers, I've got to say, 80% of the time come to us and have no understanding of how the liabilities that are sitting in their employee entitlements will be dealt with in a sales situation. So understand these elements about your business so that you're not surprised later down the track. And then keep communication open to avoid stalls. So that's it. Obviously, we've got a Q&A, but also if you are interested in buying or selling and want to understand how lawyers can help in the process, or you just want to talk through your structure more, we have free consultation available for you. A QR code on one of these handouts, so just feel free to book yourself in for a free consultation. That's it. Hope it was useful. Happy to answer any questions, obviously, when we get to the panel.
Hi, thanks for enlightening us on the concept. We want to know, you guys didn't touch more about franchise model, and if as a business owner I want to start a franchise, and what sort of things that I need to, because obviously the franchising is, you go to McDonald's, they're looking for like $4 or $5 million now, versus a few years ago you could get a franchise of a Subway for 300 grand, now it is like $1 million. So how would you correctly measure the amount you want to franchise your business for, and how would you actually approach that deal?
Not buying a franchise? You mean like actually...
Setting up a franchise.
Setting up, okay.
Okay. Yeah, so for that, from a legal perspective, I'd just say we're happy to, our franchising team will be happy to talk to you. So that's an easy way to answer your legal questions. Just book in for a free call with our franchising team. But franchising, I mean, there's a couple of elements, and you might want to talk about the sale of franchises. But a couple of elements, I guess. IP is really important. So that's one element. But just the one thing I would say is I've actually acted over the years for large franchisors who have ended up pulling apart their whole business model and recreating it because there's a very high compliance layer. So that's just one thing to be aware of when you're assessing, you know, that sort of as something to think about.
What type of industry?
In food and restaurant.
For the restaurant. Okay, so there are a few levels of, as you're going through franchising. One is, the reason why franchise businesses sell for more money, like on those ratio profit to sell price, it's not because they're easier to run. So when somebody buys a franchise, they still bought a business, all right? It's the reason that money becomes available, so credit becomes available. So a lot of these things are kind of front-loaded, and I advise you not to go that way, but you do whatever you need to do. So what would happen is, once when you hit about 12 stores, a lot of banks will assess you for the franchise, and the banks will say, okay, we're going to lend 30 or 40% against this franchise model. So the way that the industry works, then WEXPO's going to come in and it's going to invite you to come in, and you think you're doing really good, but they just want a tenant. So then WEXPO will offer another portion of money, which is normally works out to be about a third of purchase price, and they said, hey, we're going to give a contribution. So then the purchaser that's buying your franchise thinking, hey, I'm buying $300,000 franchise, but I only need to pay $100,000 for it. So that's how it works in a nutshell. Issue with that is, the moment that they set up that franchise, the setup value is irrelevant if they want to exit. What matters is how much money they're making, all right? And I've seen that over the years. It just happens. The franchise go to 10, 20, 30, and then they just collapse. 10, 20, 30 collapse. So advice I would give you if you're thinking of franchising, find a model that works for the person that buys your franchise. Make sure it works for them. The rest will take care of itself. And one of the issues that I've seen in franchise is that the franchise, so who's franchise or who's franchisee? The
Franchisee is the person who's
selling franchise. Okay. So the
Franchisor owns it all.
see, it's complicated. So franchise, all right. So this is what happens. They don't charge enough, all right? So this is a bit counterintuitive, all right? So if you go, you mentioned McDonald's. I think they take 25% from the top, but it works for you. And suppose somebody else taking 5 or 8%, and they take 5% for marketing or whatever. The issue with these franchises is that if you're charging 5% franchise fee, all right, you have to have 20 franchisors to make same money as you would make if you actually run the business. When you get to that level of 20 franchises, they're demanding certain service. So what happens then? You have to put more people to actually to service them, and it's a vicious circle. So at the beginning, the model wasn't set up properly. So he may gonna think, I'm gonna sell them a franchise and they're gonna pay me 5% and I'm gonna make money, all right? It doesn't work like that in the real life, all right? So you're better off really spending your time, and there's some good guys that can help you with this, setting up that franchise fee in such a level that gives you enough money to provide a service and to help the people that go into the business, and then everything works very well. That's one of the one of the things that I've seen that really cost a lot of franchises a lot of money because they exploded. And I know 2 or 3 that they're doing it now, and I can see what's going to happen. They're going to come to the certain level, and they're not making money, and they pull the pin, and then you read in the Sydney Morning Herald that another model went bust. All right, so the secret is to set up that model that everybody can make some money in it. You need to make money, but the person running it needs to make money. Yeah. Other questions?
Beneficiary drawings, instead of, so at the moment, I'm ashamed, I should actually understand this, but I don't. Instead of paying us directors' wages, we just draw out money as beneficiary drawings. So when you're calculating the value of a business, do they get deducted to get that net profit amount?
Okay, so it depends how you take them out, all right? So you could take them out, a lot of people, everybody in small business does that, all right? You take the money as you need it, all right? And then on the end of the year, you figure out what's the best way to actually record this because it's going to reflect the tax bill that I'm going to pay, all right? Don't worry about it at all, all right? So what happens is anything that you took out of the business is going to be adjusted because your tax return, it's a document that prepared for tax department to shows what tax you should pay. And obviously you want to make that as beneficial to you as possible. So normal process you would be to look at all the numbers and actually adjust that, put that back into the profits, and then take a fair market wage out for you. So nothing to worry about except one thing. Sometimes drawings, depending how they are recorded, if it's just clear drawings, you're taking them, you're not taking profits plus the drawings, you're actually taking profits out of the drawings. And occasionally people come to us and they said, yeah, I got a $200,000 profit, but I also was taking drawings of $2,000 a week. And they think they got the $300,000 that they took as them as the owner, but they actually didn't because those drawings were deducted from they were taken out of the profit. It's just kind of double dipping, so be very, very careful with that. But doesn't matter how it's recorded, it's not a problem when you take a business to the market. Other questions? Tough questions. There's a tough question in that corner.
I was hoping you could talk a bit more about the vendor financing. And Zoran, I really liked your idea of linking like deferred payments to the restraint of trade. I was interested, I guess, in what you're seeing in the market at the moment on how far out those vendor financing arrangements can go, the types of interest rates, and then also the kind of security that sellers will ask for if you're doing that.
Do you want to start on that?
Sure. So depends about. So vendor finance is terminology that we'll generally use in the sub $2 million market. We have different sort of terminology depending on what market you're in. So that's the first thing. In that area of the market, usually we personally, I don't know, it'd be interesting to hear what Zoran says that they see. We almost never see any vendor finance arrangement more than 2 years set out. One of the things that I say sell side is I like to see regular payments rather than, so monthly payments is our preference if we're acting sell side. And interest rates, rarely do the deals that we see have an interest rate on it. Usually that's just all built into the offer. Once again, be interesting to hear what Zoran's approach is on this. And then security, we have a fairly refined process and once again depends on appropriateness, but directors' guarantees from the purchaser, PPSR, so security interest. A PPSR may be difficult if there's other, but buyer's got other funding. So in that case, we'll find a specific security that we can all agree on. And then there might be other elements as well, but they're sort of the key elements. And I think it's really important if you're buy side coming in, you should understand you'll need to provide some sort of security if the deferred payment is a sufficient enough amount. Then in the 2 million plus market, we don't call it vendor finance because usually there'll be risk associated with it. So there will usually be an earn-out or some other contingent payment in that part of the market. And there won't be interest rates, but it will be built into the price in that part of the market as well. And then similar approach for security, but we might be looking at parent company guarantees in that end of the market or other types of guarantees and still the PPSRs.
Well, Joanna just, answered the questions about security pretty good, and sometimes you can use a little trick of the trades like I gave you, because that's more powerful to them. Depends if they're going to accept, and if they're not accepting that, then you're going to start going, all right? But it also depends who the buyer. First of all, size of the deal matters. Anything sub $2 million, if you're expecting some sort of earnout, it's going to be very small. It's going to be a couple of $100,000 or less. And that's not normally for the funding of the business, but it's rather for the security that you're going to do what you said you're going to do, and then we're going to release this money on the end. On the larger deals, almost always there's some sort of earnout. So if it's a listed company, anything that you're selling over $5 million, chances are you're not going to have a private person buying it. So it's either going to be other business purchasing or some sort of private equity. Now, word of warning about private equities in Australia, they're not real private equity, all right? So if you go overseas, if you're doing deal in some in states, for example, they already have a committed money. They got $150 million and now they're buying businesses. Private equity in Australia is a bunch, usually guys, that put this kind of consortium together, and now they're looking to find a business, and they're more like a search fund. And then once when they got a business, they go and pitch for the money to actually get it. So it's not real private equity. But sometimes they pay good money, and they normally pay a little bit more, but their process takes longer. And their due diligence could go for 6 months because they need to do due diligence, go pitch for the investors, come back, and then do proper due diligence. Now, they don't put much of their own money. So in that case, part of the fund's going to come from the investors, part of the fund's going to come from the banks, and part of the funds they will try to get from you as a seller in order to the risk and show the buyers, show the investors a low risk. Another thing is, depending who buys a business. So if I'm dealing with the owner, with one person, they're more concerned about how much money they pay. If I'm dealing with a listed company or private equity, somebody who's selling someone else's money, they're more interested to show that they went through the proper process and saved their job or the position rather than money. Because listed company, we've done the deals that they were 20-30% over the lowest offer or next best offer, just because it was listed company, but they really dragged us through this process, and there was an earnout and everything else. Because if the deal goes wrong, the CFO or acquisition manager, whoever, he wants to say, well, I've done everything, I didn't make any mistakes. So you got to gauge who you're dealing with. Yeah, I hope we answered your question. You're welcome. Yeah, we'll say around, so if anyone's, we've got 2 questions, yeah.
So a business that has pipeline orders, contracts, that aren't going to be realised except over a period of, say, 3 to 5 years. So there might be tenders that you win. So it's not on the balance sheet, it's not in the P&L, but they're contracts nevertheless. And the person that you're going to provide the contracts to will place orders over a period of time. So you've got a business that has a turnover and a track record, and then you might have $20 million worth of pipeline sales. How do you handle the pipeline? Valuation, or don't you?
Okay, it's a really good question. It comes often. Everything depends, all right? So in this particular case, if you always have a $20 million worth of pipeline, it won't have any effect on your price, rather than people going to be more confident to purchase it. Because if I got a $20 million now in the pipeline, and 10 years ago I had a $20 million worth of pipeline, that means that you need that pipeline to generate the profits and the trading that you're doing it today. If it's out of the ordinary, that you're normally working with $2 million worth of pipeline, and all of a sudden balloon to $20 million, we can negotiate that separately, all right? So we can either ask for the price, but like if they're tenders, means, I tendered but I didn't win them yet, it could go either way. Or we can do some sort of profit share, which we've done. We're actually doing one at the moment. In the midst of in the middle of the deal, we're just on the closing. They just want a contract that worth about $500,000 per month for them, all right, with really good bottom line. And they said, look, this is ludicrous. We either want to get paid for it or we're not selling a business. And we said, all right, well, how about if we actually, because we already negotiated the deal without that contract, how about if we actually do some profit share going forward? And looks like we may gonna hit that deal. What you're talking about is like a almost work in progress pipeline. So now, if you completed the work, let's say tenders, for example. Tenders do take time and energy to actually win them, and you may gonna have 5 people working on each of these tenders. So we apportion certain amount of total value to just winning the contract. So if you got 3 contracts that you won, and you didn't actually start working on them, we would argue that 5 or 10% of the profits should go to you because you won those contracts, even though the money. And in general, buyers accept that. The rest goes to them. Now, you also, with these adjustments, work in progress, you may gonna get deposit of 50% upfront, but you've done only 10% of the work. The balance gonna go to purchaser because he needs to deliver. So without knowing exactly history of your business, how do you handle that pipeline in advance? It could be just a normal course of business that doesn't have an impact, but could have there are ways that you can structure and get some benefits or even better price because of that pipeline.
I think you've covered most of it, but the only thing I'd say is we do see that scenario sometimes in earn-outs that we're working on the legal, the contractual side of. So, for example, if you're saying that the pipeline, if the pipeline will realise it will make that business worth a lot more than what the business looks like today without the pipeline, then sometimes in deals that we've been on, buyers will say, okay, well, here's the metric. If this is a value of your revenue at this is your revenue at a particular point, here's the additional top-up payments we'll make. So that's sort of like I guess a way that we have seen it play out.
Yeah, I just want to, it's a really good point about these earnouts. They don't always go down, they can go up. And another thing that was mentioned, it needs to be emphasized, Joanna just mentioned, don't make it like a cliff. If I reach $2 million in trading, I get this payment, but if I if I'm $1 behind, I drop it. So normally you taper them, and this idea about regular payments, it's much better because you can notice the problems earlier.
Yeah.
All right. And one more question here.
If we buy side, we disagree.
Yeah.
In case if someone wants to sell the business, say for last 3 years it has been making losses, but it's a 25, 30 years old business, passed through a couple of generations, so they demand some goodwill payment. What's your sort of advice how to handle that situation?
Okay, again, we got a couple of things that we're doing now, and one is actually about to go on the market. It's a very big Australian manufacturer, 75 years of manufacturing, a really known brand in that particular industry. High-end stuff, and they're getting impacted by changing what they're selling, but also the imports, cheaper imports. Quality is not there, but the price is so big. So the buyers, the customers have to go their way. So the secret to this would be who buys a business in this case. So what we're doing, we're identifying a potential buyers that could or already have manufacturing overseas. So to them, that works a lot of money because they're already set up. They'll grab a brand and they're going to take it away and start making money sooner than what you can restructure this yourself. So what's the value of this business? Well, the value of that business is going to be based on what the buyer can, how much profit buyer can make once when he restructures all of this. But just because they can, let's say you got a losing business, but somebody else can make now $1 million, that buyer is not going to pay you for what they're going to do. So the trick is to have more than one and get a bit of a competitive tension. Otherwise, the price kind of goes down to asset value. I'll buy your assets and I'll take a risk because that's how I'm offsetting my risk. Unless you generate enough interest on the market that you got 1 or 2 or 3 or more people. So that all depends on the brand and how marketing is done and how you go to the market. Or if the business is small and so it doesn't have such a big brand, it really comes down to the asset value. It comes down to which is sometimes not that bad, because you got to orderly sell. Business has been making good money for 50 years, and now the assets are worth $1 million. But you made your money over the 50 years, and you know, if you depending how much money is losing, but we sometimes say business is losing substantial amount of money. So the speed is of the essence. It's better to sell it in 3 months than in 12 months when you're losing $500,000. Just get what you got and stop bleeding. It's a tough decision to make when you're in a position like this because of all these years that you've done it, but you really need to separate yourself from those feelings. And my experience with this, and I have sold a business in the past, that's how I got into this, and you forget about you ever owned it about 4 weeks later, right? So the problems are gone, you're kind of stressed, and then you turn around and you go, this was like the world didn't end. The world goes on, all right. So if you're in that position, but we can help by talking and looking, and you need a good advice on the value of the business. Do you have something to add?
No, not about your question, but the answer, Zoran, you talked about competitive tension. That is one thing I would echo. When we act for sellers who have buyers in the wings, it can make the whole process so much easier if they're, if there's risk in the initial transaction. And it's great, of course, and I mean, I guess everyone would agree that it's great to have a number of buyers out there, but it actually, from a negotiation and power perspective, and just one other thing I'd say in relation to goodwill and a brand in the market, there can be strategic buyers who will value elements of brand or goodwill at a higher rate than the rest of the market might. But it's about someone being out there and being able to find those buyers, right?
You can also sell them separately. So somebody is going to be after the assets and customers. Somebody's going to be after the brand. And one way to test that, if you got an offer and they say, well, the brand is not worth anything, they say, all right, leave it with me and see how they react. If they say, well, no, I'm buying this, well, okay, now let's put the price in. So you got to negotiate that. But again, if you got more than one, you'll get a better price. Yes. Any other questions? Or one more question there.
Hello. What happens mostly with small business sales, buying and selling, is that the difference between the tax returns, or what you put in for tax, or what you've claimed in tax as your profits, and what you are claiming are your actual profits, because a lot of small businesses have their personal expenses and things like that interacted within that P&L that they offer. So how do you differentiate? Well, buying it through due diligence, I understand that you can probably wean that out, but when you're selling it, how do you offer that business in a way that best gives confidence to the buyer that the actual profits are the actual profits?
Okay, so it depends. Look, go back 10 years ago, we had a huge problem with cash, all right? That people would say, like, they really would take cash and they wouldn't bank it, all right? So it was legal not to bank the cash. The problem is what they do with that cash after they don't bank it, they don't declare it and stuff like that. But that's gone now because the cash is like minimal, even in the traditional cash businesses. So what the people do is put a lot of private expenses through the business. Yeah, it's not my business to say is this should be done or shouldn't be done, but it happens. As buyer will understand that as long as we can actually prove it to them. So there are certain things like which common appear, private travel, occasional vehicle going through the business, having house insurance and some of the claims for the house office while you got an office and so on. And they're not a problem. When we hit the problem is where we really stretch this, what we're doing. So I'll give you an example, which is common with builders, that they would buy a house, do home renovation, and spend $400,000 on their house. And then they said, but look, yeah, I made 200, but I also put $400,000 worth of material. Virtually impossible to sell that. Because how do you prove that this piece of timber went to that house, not this other house, all right? So best advice that I give to people like this, if you're thinking of start running it properly. Start running it, pay some taxes, because you can't have it on both ends, all right? But there are certain elements of the business, like, I mean, it's not uncommon that you have a whole family running a mobile phone through the business, but they are not material to it, but they do have a effect. So you can actually, as long as you can prove and explain why these certain things happen. Another thing that happens in the business when you're doing these adjustments, there could be one-off expenses. So I'm dealing with and it's much easier to say, for example, I'm dealing with this business that they spent $300,000 last year and this year on building this system. So it's 600, it's one-off, system is working, they're connected to the banks, whatever, and we won't have it in next year. So we can say, listen, if they were not developing this 300 wouldn't exist. So these one-off expenses need to be looked at. Even if you do the fit out for the office and now you've got a 10-year lease or you just bought a purchase, well, that can be put back into the profit. So adjustments are always made. As long as they make sense, we can make them. If they are just, your promise that this will happen, well, the buyer's not going to take it because, of course, you're going to say there's more money, and they're thinking. Doesn't mean that you're not honest, but they're just not going to believe it.
So the only other sort of thing I would say here is, as I talked about before, there can be a tax benefit sometimes in share sale versus business sale, so the way you go to market. Share sale will probably be taken out of the equation if there's too much mess in the books, because buyers don't want to buy something that's got a lot of tax risk sitting in it. So that's just one other thing to bear in mind as well. Things like this that are in the business, very important, I think, I don't know if you agree, Zoran, but that you don't go to market until you know what a buyer's going to see in the business and what they're going to think about what they see. And decisions about the way that you're going to structure the sale, i.e. share sale, business sale, whatever, should be thought about well in advance on the basis of understanding what a buyer's going to see and how they're going to feel when they're looking into the business. And that's all part of the prep for market.
100%. Sometimes going one way or the other could make a huge difference for you what you end up in the pocket. But if you're not set up for this, the only like if you want to sell the shares, but you've got a little bit of not clean books, what's going to happen? The only way to entice these buyers to purchase is to take a more risk or reduce the price, and either of them it's not in your favor. So depending, sometimes people think that the problem is big, but it's not when you look at it. Sometimes people think that the problem is not big, but it's much bigger, all right? So in that case, you just postpone, run it, sort it out, and then take to the market. So 2 years waiting may gonna be really beneficial to you, plus you're making your money in the process.
And And sorry, just one very last thing. I just think it is also timing of sale. You know, we said you should really be prepared for the market, but also just the one other thing I'd say is don't leave it until you're too cooked. Because sometimes we see sellers a lot come to the market and they are done with their business. They are cooked. And it's almost like the business has passed its heyday and they don't have the energy that they need for the transaction. So I guess that's just to make sure you take time to prepare it, but don't leave it too late until you're overcooked before you're putting it on the market.
And on that note, just following up on this, the buyer takes way more interest in recent time than something that happened 3 years ago. So if you got a really good performing business and in the last 2-3 months it's going down, even if it didn't happen because of that, but it just happened because you took your foot off the pedal, to them it's gonna say this is it. They know something is going down. So when you take a business to the market, that's the time to really push hard, run it like you're not selling it, and it's gonna help you through the process and get a better value on the end. I think we're done. Thank you guys, and we'll stay around for if somebody's got some questions.